Buenos días todos y todas. Gracias por acompañarnos hoy. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining our webinar today. My name is Joe Amador. I'm Vice President of the IAPG Houston and will be your moderator today. Emilio Asindanieri, IAPG Houston Past President, is also joining me to help with the questions and answers. We're very pleased to be hosting this webinar in line with our ongoing effort to present themes that are relevant to the regional energy sector. Today, we're very fortunate to be accompanied by Dr. Oscar Lopez-Gamundi, a distinguished professional who many of you know and with whom I've had the pleasure of working alongside. Oscar's career in geology spans over 3 decades, with significant time spent on both sides of the Atlantic Basin, from his days as assistant professor of sedimentology at the Universidad de Buenos Aires, through his time at Texaco, Chevron, and Hess, later as VP of Exploration for CNC Energy, and more recently as senior subsurface advisor to investment bank Tudor Pickering Holt, as well as to Ecopetrol America. He also founded P1 Consultants, where you can find him today. Before Oscar kicks off his discussion regarding analogies between recent offshore Southern African discoveries and the Argentine-Uruguay margin, let me provide a brief description of who the IAPG Houston is. We were incorporated in 2002 as a nonprofit organization to promote the sharing of knowledge between the US and Argentina in the energy sector. We share in the principles of our sister organization, the Buenos Aires-based Instituto Argentino del Petróleo y del Gas. Some 20 years ago, we began a scholarship program for Argentine professionals who wish to pursue graduate degrees in energy. We are proud to now have 23 scholars from our own Claudio Manzolillo program, as well as from our cooperation agreement with the Fulbright US student program. We are run by a board of about 15 professionals who provide our time on a pro bono basis. We organize events such as this technical webinar and in-person events where we host company CEOs, Argentine ministers, provincial governors. We have even hosted 2 of the country's presidents. We also offer networking opportunities such as cocktails and golf tournaments. Funding for our organization comes by way of generous contributions from companies like Chevron, Pan American Energy, Shell, Tenaris, ExxonMobil, Schlumberger, Equinor, GMP, Neoken. I see many of you here today work for these companies, so I would like to extend a special muchas gracias for your continued support. We encourage you to follow us on LinkedIn or visit our website if you would like additional information regarding the organization or how to become a sponsor or a member. Some logistics for today. We are recording this event, so please be cognizant of that. Oscar will kick off shortly with about a 45-minute presentation, and we'll take questions after that. Please submit your questions via the chat function at any time, as you are all muted. Emilio will be helping us assemble them. We will target wrapping up at the top of the hour, but might spill over a few minutes depending on the livelihood of the questions and the question and answer period. This recording will be available for those who registered. We will send you a link soon after the event. I believe that wraps up the intro. Oscar, adelante, por favor.
So we will briefly, as Joe just said, we will briefly review what is, I think, one of the most fascinating exploration themes of the last years, I would say 2-3 years, which is this South Atlantic connection and between essentially Namibia on the southern Africa and the impact of that success in exploration in the South American margin. And these 2 slides show the present day on the left, the present day of what is today the South Atlantic. And to your right, is what, in general, South Atlantic looked like during the latest Albian or Albian-Aptian, that period in the Cretaceous, Barremian a little older and a little younger all the way to the Turonian. We will be looking at the Cretaceous plate in Namibia and the impact on the South American margin. So on the right then you have essentially a paleogeography and present day to the left. A point of importance is that we will take only a look at this portion. You see my pointer, that portion of the continental margin. And as you see here, there is a transform margin that segregates tectonically this area here. For those who are familiar, you have the Tierra del Fuego here, Malvinas and Falkland Islands there. So we'll be visiting this area, which obviously is connected with Namibia. So this is just simply a little more in detail what the reconstructions are. There are two main time intervals that we will be looking at. One is called, let's say the old one during the Cretaceous, is the sag phase, the so-called sag phase in the salt basins, the pre-salt in Brazil, and south of the ridge, of the Rio Grande Ridge, is where we're going to be concentrated. So that transitional phase in Namibia is also present here. And when we go a little further up, we will see that the Willoughby's Ridge forms this barrier. The salt deposition is to the north. There is no salt to the south. That's a geography, a paleogeography well known. And there is an early drift phase to the south, and it's completely marine in the south. So that has some consequences, because so far what has been the emphasis in the South Atlantic before these discoveries in the Cretaceous was probably the half-graben configuration in the lower part, then and then in the Tertiary. And this area here, just touching the basement, is where everything started in terms of the Cretaceous discoveries. This is where the seminal work by HRT and 3 wells, one that we will refer to, which is very close to Pudu, and other more recent discoveries in Namibia. Since that time, an Aptian source was identified. And that's important because it's very close to some of the reservoirs we hope to find in South America. And this is like a mirror image, and Southern America here see the same configuration. You will see commonalities on both sides. First is C-deepian reflectors, volcanic, that you can see here. Similar on-lap configuration in the Cretaceous. And then finally, with differences, but some commonalities as well, the Tertiary comes in both margins. In some places you will see gravity-driven thrust belts, entire thrust belts driven by gravity, which are also very clear in the seismic. So this is the scheme, and in the middle you have an attempt for the paleogeography, again opening the Atlantic from the south to the north. So let's just start to figure out the play concept, meaning source rock, reservoir, and seal, for what was done in Namibia first. And there have been a lot of work here, but I just pick a couple of good visual approximations of the two main periods where source rocks have been identified. And one is Aptian Albian, and this is to your right, and you will see all the drilling that proves that there is a good source rock. And then a little higher in the section, Cenomanian Turonian. What we have to the right is probably the most important one. And we will see that if we go older in the Cretaceous section, you will see the Barremian and probably essentially lower Cretaceous source rocks are more related to restricted marine all the way to lacustrine source rocks. But the bottom line here is that at least, as Marcio Melo said long time ago, there are at least 2 active petroleum systems in Namibia. One, which is older, Barremian Aptian. We move a little bit the stages here, and a younger one, which is Elvian Senonian, which is very clearly shown in this diagrams here. Okay, so it goes to the Cenomanian, Turonian, and there is a little bit in when we go to the Carnasian and Centonian. But I will emphasize more this Aptian source rock, which is probably the most important one. So now, what has been done in South Africa, particularly in the Orange Basin, is in terms of exploration, is the discovery during the 70s of the Kudu field by Chevron and others, and is in relatively moderate water depth. The reservoir is very good. It's gas trapped in early Cretaceous Barremian Aeolian sandstones, and they are interbedded with volcanic. So we are now at the base of this Cretaceous field, and probably more related to the early breakup of the Atlantic. And a well which is just north of Kudu, here we have Kudu, and just north, which is Moosehead. There was an effort by HRT long in the 2013 or 14, drill and encounter a thick Barremian Aptian Kudu shell. Its seismic expression is here. So we have now hints of that source rock here. This is the first discovery, and there was a hiatus, a pause in exploration for several years. Now, if you look at this diagram here, where north is this way, rotating a little bit the map that you have here, the location map, you will see that Kudu is located kind of close to the coastline, and all these other prospects that you see here, some of them discoveries already, is the deep water Namibian success that we will discuss. And there, as you can see, several companies that we will look in detail how they arrive at this success in exploration. But essentially, you will see names that probably you know from the press, Graff, Jonker, Venus. Those are the major discoveries, Mopane, and Saturn, hopefully to be drilled soon. So this is down deep basin work from Kudu. So this is the neighborhood that has been so active and actually has triggered the interest, the renaissance in interest of in exploration on the other side of the pond. So here, what we have is just and we will try to see how that analogy is valid. Here with Rodriguez and others try to put together both sides of the margin. And as you can see, again, we have the half-gravens, the SDRs on both sides. Then you have this is potentially one of our, let's call it the Venus interval, where you have the on-laps on top of that basement. Here you have the MTDs and the toes with the compressive features on this side, and you will see later that Graff is a little higher here. And here what we have, I pick a line, they pick a line from the Uruguayan sector. You see, again, this that has not been drilled, and Raya, which is the only test in the Pelotas Basin on the Uruguayan sector, and we will go back to that later. In the lower part of this slide, you see again the location of Venus with the Aptian source, and on top of that, the Venus reservoirs, and a graph that stratigraphically is higher, and is more related in partially to this toe thrust. And we will see that the trap geometry is a little different. But irrespective of that, the stratigraphic component of all these traps is significant. And on the flip side, let's say, you have another section and you see how basement start climbing up. You have the SDRs, and again, you have some half gravens here, and you see candidates for source rock, and these high amplitudes here are potentially the reservoirs. Always, as I said, in the Cretaceous, nothing, we're not discussing the tertiary, which was the objective for Raya. And here is a summary, again, of what I just said. Venus related to this onlapse. A couple of tail thrusts, the Coleman, and then Graff, at least in one of the levels, related to that tail thrust. So in a way, the trapping mechanism is kind of similar to a soft thrust, if I'm allowed to say that. So this is a summary of what's happening in that neighborhood. This is schematic approach is very good. Venus is related very close to this Aptian source, and then Graff is a little higher with the possibility of having a lower Graff here as well. I have not talked so far about volumes. Volumes are still up in the air, as you probably know. Last week there was the Namibia commissioner kind of downgraded the volumes, potential volumes of Graff to 200, and Junker, which is another discovery, at 300. Junker is, by the way, here. So that is the neighborhood of shale. It is still premature to discuss what kind of volumes we have. This map that you have on the right is a map of the very active neighborhood, and we will go through that just to take a look at what the activity of the companies is. So let's start with the one that opened everything, the Venus discovery in a way. Here there is an schematic by one of the partners, Impact Oil. Total is obviously the operator, and you have an amplitude here that shows the basin floor fan or the terminal splay, terminal low, whatever nomenclature you want to use, and in the hot colors, obviously, the presence of sand with, in this case, with hydrocarbons. So it's rather unconfined, and the seismic line here shows the trap geometry that requires significant stratigraphic component, and our classic C-dependent reflectors here. So Venus is a light oil discovery and associated gas. Future will tell what the volume is. Encounter 80 plus meters of net oil in good quality lower Cretaceous sandstones. And when we go to this slide that shows in detail a couple of things, the Graff, the higher Graff reservoir level, and a couple of the Coleman surfaces for this toe thrust, and the Venus reservoir, as I explained here, SDRs are very, very obvious as well here. When we go to this detail, you can see that the stratigraphic component is important, but it's a beautiful trap. So in detail, let's take a look now at the discoveries of shale. We just look at what Total has been doing and is still doing with other wells like Nara and others. So here, this is the shale, I would say, neighborhood with Qatar Energy and Namcor as a state-owned company from Namibia as partners. The volumes are still, as I mentioned, up in the air a little bit. Probably some people in the audience know more than me about how big or how small that is. The downgrade may be related to reservoir quality, permeability, but we'll know that eventually in the future. So after Graff discovery, the consortium went to Junker nearby, And then again, everything is water depth around 1900 to 2200 deep water. And most importantly, they're trying to acquire a huge 3D in this area to assess regionally what else is there. Moving north with different actors, you have this consortium led by Galp, who has found in Mopane 1X a good oil, good light oil. And now recently, as recent as last week, they announced that in the same well, they went deeper, kind of a Graff situation, in a deep target called AVO2 in the same well. And upon completion of all the work in Mopane 1, they will go to Mopane 2, which is this location that you have there. Then other activity, because it's so much activity, and now we will wrap up the Namibian portion of this talk. Total Energy, obviously, very successful in Venus. In Narawel, they tried the extension to the west of Venus, probably pushing the envelope a little bit, yeah. But obviously, a very important sector of the basin. And then other actors came in. Sintana Energy has completed this transaction some time ago for this block here, 2A13AB, the PEL 90 block, and they retain 10%, and Chevron started the campaign for permitting for well location. And the other big activity is in this area here, this time led by Woodside. Here, remember the Moosehead that drilled the Kudu Shale, where is located close to Kudu. And then here, they will go for this Saturn superfan, as they call it. So there is a lot of activity in the area. So we kind of look at the geology and how far we can stretch the analogy to the area that is here highlighted on the South American side. And that will cover, and we will cover briefly, the Pelotas Basin from north to south. Pelotas Basin on both sides, the Brazilian sector and the Uruguayan sector, both very active in terms of licensing. And also the Colorado Basin in Argentina, offshore Argentina, very active as well. All that area has been extremely active in licensing lately, okay? So we are moving from Namibia, going all the way to this area. So let's start with Brazil. As you know, Brazil through the ANP has bid rounds and systematically, and this is just to show you the line. There are some commonalities. Again, we have related to very prograding system. You have the extensional system of this gravity-driven fold belt with the classic thrust belt at the toe. And most likely everybody will be looking at this area here. You see the similarity again, the basement here, and potentially the targets there. So you have a lot of sand coming to the system. This is a little in this section here, as you can see, we are in the northern part of the Pelotas Basin. Around here, where you see the logo of ANP, you have the maritime boundary between Brazil and Uruguay. But this is just to illustrate what we have. Again, the tectonic context is the same. You have the half gravens. In this case, in this particular line, we don't have the SDRs. They're not visible toward the east. But most importantly is this kind of features that we will see is a basin floor fan, unconfined, terminal lobes, whatever nomenclature you want to use. Potentially the Turonian, the Albion through Turonian also with important source reservoir couple. And then depending on the morphology of the basin, you have a more confined or up dip slow fans or channel levee complexes. So those are the features that are the most important features, outstanding features. And then you have obviously the tertiary that is not relevant to this top. When you look in detail, it is very interesting. This line here shows the same features. You have the SDRs again, the usual suspects, and then you have the Aptian, and probably all this area. Look how good that onlap is, and how this would be an interesting part of the basin. Now, when you look at the amplitudes, you start seeing some very good brightness on this close to the basement, but there are some isolated things labeled here as 2 that stands out a little bit. Yeah. If we use some attributes or composite attributes like sweetness, and actually what you have there, it's when you have a, let's say, higher amplitude and low frequency, that's the combination of sweetness, that highlights sands with potential hydrocarbons. So you will see that there is a difference in response. Everything that is close to this Aptian potential source rock is brighter than what is isolated. That doesn't mean that you don't have sands. It means that probably migration is a little bit more of a problem when you go up in the section if you're relying on the Aptian source. When you go to the Coblane amplitude, which is basically, instead of flipping back and forth, I'm talking about this, between fars and nears, what you do is fars minus nears times fars, which highlights basically the same thing that the sweetness attribute will highlight. And again, we have this area in 1, all this on lap, I would call it Venus lookalike interval, high is really bright compared to these isolated areas here up in this section in the Cretaceous. That is interesting because a similar exercise can be done regionally in the early phase of exploration in the Argentine part of the margin. So on the ANP, what they do, they have several. A few years ago, they have the first big bid round in Pelotas, and companies were taking several blocks. And the system that they have fixed dates, and they have this permanent bid round. And in the last one, December 13 last year, 193 blocks were auctioned in general, but 44 blocks were acquired in Pelotas frontier basin, essentially, with Petrobras operating 29 with partners, and Chevron was one of the companies that, with that push that they have in Namibia, they are now doing the same thing on the Brazilian side of the Pelotas basin. Now, we just very briefly discuss the Brazilian sector of Pelotas, which is essentially what you have here. This is the maritime border between Brazil and Uruguay, and this is what Uruguay has been doing. Now we're moving south. They have leased out the entire offshore. You see the logos there of the companies. The only one that you may not know is probably Challenger, a small company with assets in Trinidad and other places, and they took this last block. So right now it's all leased out due to the success of ANCAP organizing these bid rounds, and obviously there are possibilities to farm in. The 2 lines there will illustrate the Punta del Este portion, the Punta del Este basin, and the Uruguayan sector of the Pelotas basin, because there is a major high called the Polonia High that divides both basins. So let's take a look at those two and the configuration in seismic that will throw some light on what can be expected in future drilling. So this is on the Pelotas basin, the Uruguayan sector. Here is the location. Here's the maritime, again, a border. Here, this dot is the Raya well, and here is the section that goes through Raya. As you can see, again, the major sequential framework of the margin is very similar everywhere. You have either SDRs or syn rift. You have tectonically driven subsidence. Then you have an expansion of the basin, obviously, in the Cretaceous, and then finally you have the Tertiary coming back strongly with all this sediment supply coming from the continent. But the important thing here is that Raya never tested the Cretaceous, and you can see here there is a lot of activity in terms of seismic in the Cretaceous. What Raya, which at that time was the well that was drilled, was a record in terms of water depth. What Raya was looking at is an Oligocene fan, very clear in the seismic, but unfortunately was water bearing. The turbidite samples were very good, very high porosity. They were thick, as you can see here, an interval of 135 meters of good reservoir. But most likely the postmortem is indicating that there was no connection with the plumbing was failing. So the lack of large faults and essentially too far from the potential sources that obviously are in this green interval here is probably the reason why Raya failed. But the important thing is that in this sector of the Uruguayan sector of the Pelotas Basin, this well doesn't prove or disprove anything about the Cretaceous. So this is on the Pelotas portion on the Uruguayan portion of Pelotas. Now, if we go south of the Polonia High, in order to see, the drilling is just very modest, and you need to go back to the 70s, where Chevron drilled two wells, the Lobo and Gaviotin, but the plain concept was completely different. Again, the scheme is the same. You have continental crust, initial half gravens, asymmetric half gravens that toward the west that interval is dominated by sea-deepened reflectors. Then again, you have a very active Cretaceous interval. What I mean active is there is a lot of activity in terms of reflectivity here. And then you have the Paleocene and the Miocene. So when you go to Lobo and Gaviotin, the concept was completely different. They were going to highs, four-way closures on the shoulders of these half gravens, as you can see. And these four-way closures just touched the basement. The basement ended up to be Permian. And this field of the Syn Rift was essentially considered dry. However, there were some fluid inclusions with oil and gas in both wells, especially in the Cretaceous sequence, in the little portion here and here, which is telling you that there's something going on in the Cretaceous with migration up dip. But the target was here, and there were dry holes. So that's all the activity in Punta del Este. Again, in the Pelotas portion of Uruguay, they tried Tertiary. in Punta del Este, they try the much older play, and the Cretaceous was not the target. So if we move now south, what we have here is what happened in Argentina. In Argentina, obviously, for decades, major discoveries were in that portion that I call, south of the transform margin, transform fault, in that portion that covers the southern tip of South America. And those were the discoveries. But those discoveries have nothing to do with what we are discussing today, with trying to find analogies between this new play in Namibia and try to connect it to our South American margin. And as you probably all know, there are two main plays there: the Austral Basin, which is essentially in the southern tip of Argentina, a little bit in Chile, and offshore Argentina between Tierra del Fuego and Malvinas and Falkland Islands, and is the so-called Spring Hill play on highs, then with the excellent top seal, because it's a retrogradational sequence, Spring Hill and the overlying seal, punctuated transgressions that end up most of the times draping over these highs, or sometimes just not reaching and creating a portion of both highs, but you still have an overlap here. In short faces, very shallow from the positional point of view, and Rio Chico High is a subdivision, but you have a series of highs there that can be mapped with detail in 3D, and it has been very successful. Is a very well-known gas province in Argentina. But again, has nothing to do with the play we are discussing today. The other one, and again, south of that transform fault, is a stranded accumulation of sea lion in the North Malvinas Falkland Basin. If you're familiar with that area, you know that there is a series of north-south gravens. This is the orientation of this line here. There's a series of clinoforms, and at the toe of those clinoforms, you have several fans. One of those is the sea lion fan. This section is at right angles and is essentially within the half graben. Now, so it's a different game. Reservoir and source are part of this seam rift, this rift half graben field, and is a non-marine setting, and that is proven by the waxy nature of the oil discovered. Sea lion rests here, and most of the effort previous to this wave of activity, essentially by rockhopper, were placed shallow. So these two plays have very little to do. So we're going to move north and see where Namibia may play a role. And this is a very interesting way of putting things graphically by Heather Ritten. And what they did is they took the original that we discussed already, our original orientation for Namibia with the Aptian source and Venus here, the decollement, one of the decollements here with the MTDs and the tail thrust is the same line that I showed before. SDR is very visible. And what they did is they flip it. And they flip it. And when you flip it and you go to a line in the offshore of Argentina at the play level, this is very appealing, because what you see is the same configuration, potentially the same source rock, then covered by a series of, to be defined, different types of reservoirs, whether it's our basin floor fans or slow fans. And again, with this type of on-lap, regional on-lap. So, and when you reverse Argentina, that cross-section back, you have the same orientation. I think this is a very graphic way to see the analogies between the two margins. Now, when you apply at the regional level, when you apply again this game of some attributes, looks very interesting in order to focus where your potential reservoirs are eventually with hydrocarbon charge. And here again, as we look at on the Brazilian sector of Pelotas, we have the line, we have some hints of where to find some potential reservoirs. We apply again the same composite attribute, sweetness, that I really like, and you start seeing where the reservoirs could be potentially be, and following the same with the same workflow, we end up with the same attribute, the fars minus nears times fars, and we're just telling us basically what the sweetness is showing. So you see a series of candidates, not that much close to the basement, so-called, or let me rephrase that, between the rift and the sag, I would say, but not very close here. And potentially all this transparent portion, that may be your source. And on top of that, there is an interval clearly here, even at this level, and with the full volume, you can see it. There is a good candidate for reservoirs here. So again, maybe Aptian, and then your Aptian source, and then your reservoirs. We'll see. Now, this activity that I showed before in Uruguay has been expanded, and as you are fully aware, there is a lot of activity in this Colorado Basin. Colorado Basin that has a configuration that we will show in the next slide. But the efforts in the Colorado Basin in terms of drilling go back to 90s, and even before, but very close to the coastline. You know, a couple of wells venture a little bit, but this deep water area has not been really tested. And this is the area where the Namibia concept needs to be tested. So you see the activity of some familiar faces. You have Shell and Total, big players in Namibia. They're here, the Equinor and others, and obviously YPF, who has a vast knowledge about this. The company that obviously has the most knowledge of and along this margin. But our heritage, so a couple of things. Our heritage is the well that will be drilled apparently first half of this year. Permits and other situations have been approved. There was a little bit of discussion by environmental groups, but this is going, and is a three-way. The structure is three-way against a major fault that you can see. Yeah, it's probably the master fault of this have Graven reactivated, and then here is the position of our heritage. Now, a word of caution, because in terms of reservoir type, we're looking at a completely different picture. We're not looking at deep water reservoirs. We're looking at shallow water reservoirs, and we will see that later. But here, you can see that it's labeled as shore phase, and I'll give you an idea of the kind of reservoir that you are looking at here. The main target is this Turonian shore phase sandstones, according to the operator and partners. And let's take a look. And no well penetrations of the Varemian-Elven interval, the proven source on the Orange Basin. So, oops, sorry. So if we look at this diagram that I have here, it will explain a little bit the configuration and the reasons why this well is located or it is are planning to drill in this position. This is roughly west east, and what is showing is the Colorado Basin has a significant sand supply, and it has a buttress here, or outer high, which is called the Colorado High, that kind of capture most of the sands in Colorado Basin. And with this balance between this high and accommodation space and sediment supply, you end up in phases that are not dewatered. So in a way, the Colorado High is a buttress to the sediment supply that is coming from the continent. So we're going to take a look at this, but I want to draw your attention to the equivalent in terms of trap geometries, types of reservoirs, the positionally, maybe is here. Deeper water, needless to say, a challenge operationally, but you can see that this area, what is called the Northern Argentinian deep water basin, which is this area here, has the usual suspect. You have the SDRs, you have the half gravens, then you expand the basin and you start having this onlap on this slope. So that looks very similar to what we have seen on the African side. But let's go back to block CAN 100, where Argerich will be drilled, which is in this particular location. So is a major structure. Again, you have your three-way, in some portions is four-way, but this is the master fault here. You have Argerich here. Depending how you play the spill point, it can be even bigger. But that is your target in this area. So when you do a spectral decomposition, which is a nice way to highlight not only the positional features, but also structural features. It's a good attribute as well. But it's mostly used for the positional features of the reservoir. What you have is a very classic and very traditional, linear coastline, where in this spec decom is just below the reservoir, which is this Turonian reservoir. And here you have the location of the well, the shore face, which is this amalgamation, actually, between dunes, beach, and shore face. All that you can see probably, you go to Galveston, not very far from where I am, and that's the classic linear feature of the wave-dominated coastline. There are no deltas around. So you have three segments: the coastal plain with channels, the shore face, lower shore face decreasing with decreasing net to gross, and finally offshore transition. So what we're aiming here is at a different type of reservoir, as I explained. This channel apparently in this work by the Equinor and partners suggests a wave-dominated shoreline, and this kind of linear feature that I just mentioned here is an elongate northwest-southeast oriented coastline, and these bodies are usually very long and very narrow, 5 to 10 kilometer bodies with high amplitude. They're interpreted as sandy shore faces, very similar to some North Sea fields. And on top of that, because this is essentially punctuated as a transgression, there's a top seal that provides this transgression, provides the top seal for this feature. So similarities, yes, there are. Differences too, but remembering that the well, the first test in deep water, operational deep water, but not deep water reservoirs, will be drilled in the Argentine sector of this margin in this position, knowing that probably the closest analog in terms of trap geometry and the positional reservoir, the positional settings for the reservoir is not there. It's a little deeper. So with that, I will thank you for your patience, and I open now for questions and comments. Comments are welcome, because I'm sure in the audience there are people who have some information that eventually want to share with us, because this is just based on public information on the public domain, plus personal experience on not so public data. Thank you.
Well, thank you, everybody. We will now proceed with the question and answer session. Emilio, the floor is yours.
Yes, thank you, Joe, and thank you, Oscar, for a very interesting presentation. I see we have quite a robust amount of participants and a few questions. I'll start with the first one. The crustal architecture on the Uruguayan side is significantly steeper with a thicker sedimentary column compared to the Namibia side. How do you think this may affect the source rock quality or maturity? Could it be highly diluted on the Uruguayan side?
Well, I think of the two factors that you mentioned, I think I'm not sure by dilution, I mean plastic dilution and poor source rock. I'm pretty sure basic modeling will be required because it's deeper and a thicker column. So from that point of view, yes, it will be an exercise that needs to be done. Yeah, I would say of the two factors, maturity is probably one that needs to be taken care of and looked at.
Okay. There's a couple of questions about or references. One is whether you can provide the Ferro et al. 2019 reference, and the other one is if the Etherington paper has been published.
I can do that. If you will send me up there, you have my email. You send me an email to remind me, and I'm very good at answering. You know? Okay. I didn't say the time frame, but no, I'm joking. I will send the references, of course.
Okay, great. Regarding the RHH well, I see quite a few questions. I will probably try to group them. In your opinion, what is the biggest subsurface risk element for the well? How would success of this well potentially de-risk Punta del Este or Pelotas Basin? Or otherwise, how would the failure condemn these other basins?
You mentioned, we're talking about the RHH well?
Yes.
Yes, okay. As I mentioned, what is the main risk here? You know, even though it's very well imaged, we are looking at a different type of reservoir. Okay, probably very good, but probably very thin. If you're aware with this shore face reservoirs are extremely good, clean, you know, due to winnowing of waves and everything, but that's another topic. But they're thin, so I'm not sure. The big issue here is the volume. If they are thin, they are hard to develop because it's a linear feature. You need several wells. I think the problem is more on the volume than on the risk elements. I feel very confident, and I think the consortium as well, on top seal. The structure is there. It's a three-way against a fault. From that point of view, better than other 100% strat traps. But I think the challenge there will be what I just mentioned, not the net to gross, but the thickness of the pay. And the consequence of that, volumetrics and how this economically will fly or not. Whether will fly or not.
Yeah. And any comments about how this well may or may not impact the other basins, the Punta del Este and Pelotas Basin?
To be frank, I don't think if a failure, I don't think it will impact what we have. They have just leased in Uruguay. The only thing is that if they don't find a sniff of hydrocarbons, because here we are, if there is a common theme, is that we're looking at this Aptian, around Aptian, this Aptian source rock, okay? Even, I remind you that even Lobo and Gaviotine, and you saw the location of those wells in Punta del Este, inboard and different play, even those, they have fluid inclusion with hydrocarbons, okay? So the only condemning result would be a bad result for them, would be probably the lack of any hydrocarbon.
Yeah. And do you think the well of the Argerich prospect can be charged from an outboard source?
I hope so. Yeah. Yes. Even though to be fair, this wells in Colorado Basin inboard, offshore, but inboard, they have some hydrocarbons. We can only hope that outboard that I described, where you have the SDRs and the pinch outs on top, that potentially is the closest thing in terms of age and framework to the Aptian source on the other side. Yes.
Joe, we have probably 4 or 5 more questions. Are we okay in time to continue?
Yeah, let's go ahead.
Okay. Oscar, would you comment on the extent of the Aptian source rock on the Uruguayan and Argentina margins? Seismic suggests the interval overlaps quite a distance outboard from the margin in very deep water.
Indeed, and that is a challenge. If you remember the line in I think in Punta del Este and also in Pelotas in the Uruguayan sector, they are far. The good news there is that in general the column on top is not, it's not very thick. So I don't think it is immature. I think it's avoiding the gas issue here, because the gas discovery there, I don't think it will fly economically. But you're right, that is a problem mentioned in the first question. The slope and everything, it's very different in Namibia and in this side of the pond, and that goes back to how the South Atlantic actually open. But that is a difference.
Okay, continuing with the technical questions. Any hints about Seno-Turonian source rock in the Argentine-Uruguay margin? Any correlation on seismic from conjugate margin? What about preservation?
Cenomanian-Turonian in Namibia and is there. There is a little bit of source rock. In the second or third slide, you will see that those are present-day TOCs. So it's encouraging there. And also, what is encouraging is that helps all these reservoirs that are not so close to the Aptian and requires kind of a tortuous plumbing system migration path. So from that point of view, Namibia looks good. How can I put this? Informal conversations suggest that you may have something similar in the Colorado Basin. Let's put it that way. And I'm afraid I can't disclose anything.
Mhm, mhm.
But
Um,
companies can talk within them. Yes.
Your thoughts on the, this is probably related to the previous one, your thoughts on the Turonian source rock versus the Aptian source rock potential
Yes.
along the Pelotas margin. So we're talking about Pelotas here.
Yeah.
The Aptian is often quite deep and potentially more gas prone.
Again, that is the risk, and basic modeling should tell us which one to go. Turonian has been an old guess. You know, I remember decades ago, everybody was talking about the Turonian as one of these anoxic events. The problem with the Turonian, as far as I remember, is in some places it's very good, but volumetrically it's maybe is challenging because of the thickness of the Turonian. But the Turonian obviously is another candidate. And frankly, there is no firm evidence that obviously for Venus is just there, the Aptian. So, but for reservoirs charged with hydrocarbons that are up in the section, i.e. Graff and others, there may be contribution that is not only related to the Aptian. Turonian alone, I'm not sure it will work, but we'll see. There is a lot of work done on the Namibian side, more than what I show here, that comes from the 2010, 2013, 14, where originally the Moosehead well is part of that, the identified Kudu shale, and then a couple of other wells, Wingate and other to the north. But there is a lot of work, and that has been updated with the new drilling. I'm pretty sure a few people in the audience know more than me about the new data.
Mm-hmm. Maybe some of it was already covered. Do you have some insight regarding the thermicity on both sides?
The what?
Thermicity.
Sir,
Thermicity. Thermal temperature.
oh yeah. Well, you need to talk to the friends of Ancap for Raya, you know, which is a modern well, I mean recent well, and you can start doing your play with gradient. In general, I would say that yes, on the South American side, heat gradients are higher, and or thicker overburden.
Okay. Couple of questions more on the commercial side. Has there been a discussion about the second offshore license round in Argentina since the new administration took over? I can answer that one.
Good, go ahead.
I think it's no. We're all waiting for something. Oscar and I were discussing this yesterday. When will the Archer each well be drilled? I think we covered that. Equinor was saying first quarter could extend to the anywhere in the first half, right, Oscar?
I would say first half to be sure, but it's imminent. Yes.
Okay. All right. I see quite a few kudos to you, Oscar, about the content of the presentation. I don't think we have any more questions to answer.
Good. And if you have anything that pop us later or you need a specific reference, you can send me an email and I'll shoot back another one with information.
Well, thank you, Oscar, so much, and Emilio for co-hosting. It's been a great session. Unfortunately, we do need to wrap up. Please feel free to contact Oscar. You have his website and his email address there on the screen if you'd like to continue our discussion. And thank you all so much for participating in today's session. As indicated earlier, there will be a recording made available shortly. Follow us on LinkedIn, become a sponsor, or join as a member. We would, if you would like to stay informed regarding the IAP EIPG Houston's events. And we will see you next time. Gracias, Oscar.
Thank you, and thank you, the EIPG Houston, for the invitation. Thank you.
Ciao.
Ciao.